Hello again, everybody. God be with you. Well, I've come to the last story in this book, Bob Hartman's More Bible Tales. Last one in the book, and this one's called the Yawner's version. Mum, I said, I'm tired. I've been working all day. Mum, I said, I don't like lectures at the best of times. Give me something to do, yes, and I'm with you. But to just sit there and listen to some guy talking, it's not really my thing. Mum, I said, I'm glad that this Jesus stuff you're into makes you happy. Everybody needs a hobby. I'm pleased that you found yours. But a guy coming back from the dead, that's a step or three too far for me. So you go, and don't worry, I'll make myself some dinner. I tried every excuse in the book. I really did. But your mum is your mum. And when she gives you that look like you're killing her because you won't do what she wants you to do, it's hard to say no. And that's how I found myself on the third floor of some meeting hall in the middle of Troas, sitting on a windowsill, as far back and as far away from the speaker as I could get. Mum was up front, of course, with a bunch of her friends, yapping and gabbing like she hadn't seen them for months, except she sees them every week, and sometimes in the middle of the week too. They keep her busy, and that's a good thing, I guess. Like I said, they were yapping, but when the lecture started, they shut right up and leaned forward like it was some god or some hero that was talking. Their fascination with the guy escaped me at first. He was a bit of a runt, to be honest, with a lazy eye and a tendency to talk without taking a breath. But he seemed sincere enough, like he really believed in what he was saying. I'd go as far as to say that he was passionate about it, and obviously wanted the rest of us to be passionate too. He started with the same story I'd heard from my mum about this Jewish teacher called Jesus who lived in Judea back when Tiberius was the emperor. He was supposed to be some long awaited saviour of the Jews. He taught people about God. He did miracles. But then he upset some of the leaders and he was put to death. End of story. Except that this Paul, who was speaking, said that wasn't exactly the end of the story. He said that this Jesus didn't stay dead, that he came back to life after 3 days and then went up into heaven. As I say, more than a bit of a stretch from my point of view. But then he said something that really did get my attention. He said that he'd actually seen this Jesus after he came back from the dead. He had been an enemy of Jesus' followers and was chasing them and arresting them, and was on this trip to Damascus when Jesus appeared to him in a vision or something and talked to him. And after that, he became a follower of Jesus himself and travelled around the world telling people about him. I made a mental note to try and talk to him about that when he was done speaking. Did he really see this Jesus? Or was it some kind of hallucination thing? Just his imagination? There was supposed to be some kind of meal afterwards, so I thought there might be a chance to get him on one side. Problem was, once he'd finished with the story bit, he just kept talking. And I have to say, it wasn't as interesting. My mum looked like she was still listening. She was leaning forward and all. But she'd been part of this group for a little while and understood more of what was going on. And she hadn't been working all day. I, on the other hand, had been up with the sun and had been down loading and unloading boats at the dock. My uncle, my mum's brother, got me the job. And even though it was hard, it kept us going, which we needed since my dad was dead. I thought about other stuff at first, about the job, about going fishing, about we were having for dinner. I was starving. But the guy just kept talking. I thought about sneaking out, But every 10 minutes or so, my mum would look back at me and smile. No chance of escape then. Then I looked out the window. It was a long way down, but I could pick out the people walking past, what they were wearing, what they were doing. I started to count them, but that was probably the worst thing I could have done. Okay, they weren't sheep, but they might as well have been, because the more I counted, the sleepier I got. It was just a yawn or two at first, but then I couldn't stop doing it. So I watched the speaker guy again, but I had no idea what he was talking about by this time. Mum smiled again. I smiled back, and then my eyes snapped shut. I was asleep, but just for a second. Oh, that's what it felt like. What time was it? And then, you know how it is. The harder you try to stay awake, the harder it is to actually do it. The eyes kept closing. The guy's voice kept fading. And then I'd force myself awake again. And then the whole thing would repeat itself. I pinched my leg a couple of times. I shifted my bottom. I did everything I could to think I could think of. And then I thought, what did it matter? If my mum asked me what I thought, I could always say, I liked the first part, and leave it at that. I didn't need to stay awake. So I gave in. I fell asleep. And that's when I started to dream. Nice dreams at first. I was out on the boat with my uncle. I was fishing. It was hot and sunny. The water was reflecting off the sea. Then I was eating. Better still. This lamb roast my mum makes. Delicious. Oh, but then someone was chasing me. Don't know who. I was running. I was trying to get away. So I climbed up these steps. Up and up and up. I was on a roof. He was after me. Couldn't see his face. It was dark. I was scared. I ran to the edge of the roof. I tripped. And like happens in dreams all the time, I started to fall. They say that if you fall in a dream and hit the ground and die, that you die in real life, which I thought was ridiculous. But that doesn't stop you from not wanting to hit the ground in your dream. So I did what everyone does when they're falling in their dream. I forced myself awake. And much to my surprise, what I discovered was that I actually was falling. The ground was rushing towards me, but there was no waking up this time, only darkness as my head hit the street below. And that should have been it. End of story. But then I heard my name. Eutychus, off in the distance, but my name nonetheless. And when I forced one eye open, like waking from a dream, there was another eye peering into it. A lazy eye. And then somebody said, he's alive. And somebody cheered, and somebody cried, and several somebodies picked me up and carried me back into the room. Somebody grabbed my hand too, but I knew who that was. No need for guessing there. Sorry, Mum, I whispered. I fell asleep. I fell out the window. I thought I was going to die. What do you mean, thought? Said one of the men who was carrying me. You did die, boy, and Paul brought you back to life again. Hush, said my mum. There's no need to get into it. Not yet. Let him get his strength back first. But it's a miracle, said one of the other men. Everybody ought to know. All in good time, said my mum, and she squeezed my hand again. Oh, I'm just so glad that you're all right, she sniffed. Me too, I groaned. Me too. So they laid me down upstairs, and everybody had this meal that they call the Eucharist, which means thanks, which seemed particularly appropriate that night, especially for me and my mum. I never did get to talk to that Paul about him seeing Jesus. I thanked him, of course, more thanks, But it didn't seem right somehow to question whether he'd talked to a man who'd come back from the dead, seeing as he'd sort of helped me do that too. And that's my little tale, I guess. I listened to a talk by a man called Paul. It went on a little bit long. I fell asleep. I fell 3 stories out of the window. End of story. Not. Well, that's the end of a story about a young lad who was listening to one of Paul's stories when he was in Troy. It's all made up by Bob. I don't think it's ever been documented, but I kind of like the story. There you go. Well, that's the end of my stories from Bob Hartman stories. But I've got another book by Bob Hartman, all about the bad guys. I'll pick one of those for next week. In the meantime, I hope everybody stays safe, stay clear and stay vigilant, and we'll get through it together. In the meantime, God bless you.